want to have your face on the screen, please just turn off your camera. So yes, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is Ngunnawal country. If you might know where it is, it's on Mount Painter, North Canberra. And this lovely guy was very friendly at that moment on Saturday, but I have been swooped 3 times since by magpies, not that one, but multiple magpies, the joys of living in Canberra. So Ngunnawal country is where I've lived as an adult, my whole adult life. It's where I've had children and raised them. And it's a fantastic and beautiful country. And I thank the Ngunnawal people for letting me thrive here on this country. So if you don't know me, I'm a clinical psychologist and research fellow at the Research School of Population Health. In my clinical work, I work with people living with post-traumatic stress disorder, specialising in that with first responders and veterans. And in my research work, I work in improving the quality of life of people living with multiple sclerosis. Thanks, Toby. So the next slide is just an activity we can do together. And I can't quite see it. There it is. So today is interactive, so please, get into the chat and have a chat. That's really cool. And engage with this. You're here, so let's do this together. So a lot of the concepts today are based on acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT as we call it. So it's a type of therapy. And I just wanted to drop anchor with you. It's an activity we call dropping anchor. And it's basically to help us ground and connect with the world around us. So the first thing, there's 3 steps to grounding or dropping anchor together. So the first thing to do is just to acknowledge whatever it is inside you. So it might be thoughts or feelings or memories or some sort of sensation. So just pay attention to what's there and notice it with openness and curiosity and without judgment. And you don't have to change anything. It's just about acknowledging that it is there with you at the moment. The second step is to come back into your body. So if you're sitting down, you might want to put your feet on the floor and press them against the floor. You might want to straighten up your back or neck or have a stretch. I always yawn when I do this, so that's okay. Have a stretch, shrug your shoulders, connect back into your body. And then the last step is to engage in what you're doing now. And a nice way to do that is just to sort of notice what's around you. What can you see at the moment? And if I'm quiet, what can you hear around you at the moment? You might be able to smell something if you're having your breakfast, or smell something, all the beautiful lilac out at the moment, and taste. So pay attention to this moment and focus as we share it together. So this exercise is called Dropping Anchor, and it uses the acronym ACE or ACE, where we're reminded to acknowledge our thoughts and emotions, to come back into our body and to engage in what we're doing. So time for chat in the chat box. So if I asked you a question, it is, emotions are, if we get to the next slide. Got a bit of delay there, Toby. That's okay. Emotions are. So what comes up? Have a think about that. What's your reaction? If you want to put something in the chat box, what comes up when you think emotions are? Yep, someone said messy. Emotions are feelings. Distracting, good one. They're changeable. In my client work, often a burden, yeah, we get quite like variable ups and downs. We can get some quite like they're annoying, part of life. Yeah, they're annoying, they're distracting, they're unhelpful. There's a variety of things that we might relate to the thing. When I ask you what are emotions, emotions are what? So then if we move to the next question, emotions are, the next slide asks you, what influenced, and sometimes they sneak up on you, that's for sure. What influenced your response to that? So I just asked you, what are emotions, but what actually influenced your response? So if you can put that in the chat box. So what does influence our perspective on what emotions are? Yep, your current emotions, that's fantastic. Things like experiences can definitely. Yep, so current observations, what you can notice at the moment. Physical status, so for example, if we're tired, how I'm feeling now, state of mind. Yeah, thinking about them for my work. So there's many factors that can influence how we would respond to that. And I've just got a couple in the next slide. So today, I'm not here to make overgeneralizations, take from this presentation what you find useful. So, I might say there's this global thing, but of course, everything has context and perspective. But some general reasons that, would influence how you respond to the question emotions are things like culture, language, and social norms. So some cultures are much more comfortable expressing emotions than others. And that's, of course, related to our social norms. Language plays a role in emotions because some languages have a lot more words, simple language, to represent emotions than others. Age. So it's okay for a 2-year-old to chuck a tantrum, but not adults, or most adults are allowed to do that. There's some stereotypes around gender and what's appropriate if you're male or female, and we generally have the stereotype that females are more emotional, which is a problem with mental health. So family and modelling. So if your family just shut down emotions and said, stop doing that or don't feel that way, you could see why you would not be particularly emotional. Of course, experience, again, if you got shut down, you probably think, well, emotions shouldn't be expressed. There's negative consequences. Context, so it's okay to be emotional at a funeral, but maybe not at work, potentially, depends where you work. Personality, again, some people are much more comfortable and open to expression of emotions than others. And also beliefs about emotions. And I've got some beliefs, some rigid beliefs that I'll go through. So there's plenty of things that can influence how you would have your perspective of what emotions are. So, well, what are they? Well, the American Psychological Association have a definition that I've described off their dictionary website. It's a complex reaction pattern involving experiential, behavioural, and physiological elements. And it's basically how we attempt to deal with a personally significant matter or event. So emotions have multiple aspects to them. They're complex. And I'll go through that a little bit now so we can work through that. So in that definition, it talked about having the subjective experience and interpretation. So that's really important, and we'll get to that. So the way you interpret an emotion is unique to you. The physiological response, there's been a lot of research on that. And the way we behave or express our response to emotions is part of it. So we'll go through those 3 sections now. So there's this really lovely quote. So Viktor Frankl, if you don't know, was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi death camps, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he has this really wonderful quote around subjective experience. So between a stimulus and a response, there is a space. Now, sometimes we don't notice the space, but there is a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. And he talks about in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So subjectivity is really important in emotions. So there's 2 people that are apparently in the same situation who can have a very different emotional response. So one person might feel angry about an event, whereas another person might be sad or indifferent. They don't care so much. So the subjective response, or the meaning we make from it, is super important. Now moving to that physiological slide, the response is impacted by our nervous system, and it's normal to have an autonomic response. So if we get angry, for example, things might happen, like our heart rate might increase, or we might feel hot. Our muscles get tense, so we get ready to punch someone potentially if we want to do that. So the autonomic nervous system is super important in our physiological response to emotions. And that regulates our fight or flight mechanism. So are we going to run from this person or run towards them? Of course, it helps us to survive. So if we feel afraid, it helps us to run away from scary people or scary animals. And it's strongly associated with facial expressions and body language. So there's lots of physiological aspects to emotions. So if we move into the behavioural responses then, oh, that didn't quite work, but that's okay. How do we express our emotions? Now, facial expressions and body language are super important in that. Now, again, thinking about social norms. So in some cultures, it's appropriate to be quite expressive, whereas others not so much. So we can be genuine in our expressions when we feel safe and comfortable, but we may not be genuine when it's not appropriate. So if we're feeling super angry, we might do the happy smile to camouflage that because we don't want to express that in certain situations. So it's okay to be angry at football, for example, if your football team's not winning, but it's not okay to be angry at work, for example. It depends, of course, on your social norms and your personality type as well. So it basically shows that there's a lot about emotions. There's the behavioural, the physiological, the interpretation and the subjective experience. So it's a complex mental state. But we do know that emotions and the way we manage them can influence our mental health. So what are emotions? So if we go back into the beginning then, they are. So I like that, but they are normal and essential. My internet is unstable. Am I still hanging with you? Good. They're normal and essential. They're present in everything we do. Now, they might not be noticeable. If you're ambivalent, you know, that's still an emotion, right? Just like I don't care, that's not important to me. They can help us to communicate and connect with others. So if we're feeling affectionate, we would want to go up to someone and maybe hug them or whatever. Or if we're feeling cranky at someone, we might avoid them and move away from them. Emotions can motivate us or demotivate us. So if we're feeling really a sense of injustice, we might be like, I need to change that. It's not appropriate. Or if we're feeling, you know, like a little bit ambivalent, it might be like, well, I can't be bothered doing that. I'm not going to do that. Now, it certainly influences our decision making. So I don't know, a really boring example is if you're in the supermarket buying cheese, you might say, well, I'm definitely buying that cheese because the last time I bought it, I had a really nice picnic with my friends and it was lovely. Or you might say, no, I'm not buying that cheese because when I had that, I had a fight with my family and it has a bad memory to it. So definitely emotions can influence our decision making. But the take home today is that they're complex and dynamic. So I was going to show you just one model related to emotions. Now, it's one model based on one perspective with one position, is to say there's a few out there. They do have similarities though. So this is one by Plutchik, it's his Wheel of Emotions. And the take home with these kind of models, he suggests there's only 8 basic emotions, and there's a bit of debate about that, but it doesn't matter. So in this model, there's 8 basic emotions. He suggests there's over 30,000 different types of emotions. So clearly we don't have them on this diagram, but it shows that there's many emotions and that can be quite complex. The 8 that he chose is based on the physiological response that we have. And he sort of framed them that there's opposites as well. So there's joy is opposite to grief, for example, and it was based on the physiological reaction that we have. So when we feel joy, we want to connect with others, whereas when we feel sad, we want to withdraw from others. And in this model, he also has the combinations. So, you know, he's saying that if I combine joy and trust, I might feel love, for example. And, you know, trust and fear, I might feel submission, for example. So the take home is that emotions are complex. Often then, you know, we can combine them, so we get complex emotions. We also have the intensity is there as well. So sometimes emotions are super intense and sometimes they're not, and that vertical dimension represents that. So there's one model of emotions. The good thing about these kind of things, if you don't have a very big vocabulary of emotions, that can sort of help to say, okay, what am I feeling? What are the words for this? So what aren't emotions? So emotions are not. Now, in the acceptance commitment therapy framework, we don't like to say they're positive or negative. We just like to say they just are. So emotions are. They're not good or bad. They're just an inward experience of an outward event, and they're certainly not permanent. And one way we describe them is that they're like waves on the sand. They come in and they go, and they come in and they go. So that's the sort of framework that I would normally use regarding emotions. And then another metaphor that we talk about in this space is what we call the sky metaphor. And if anyone might recognise where that is in Canberra, it's in Coombs. So imagine you're sitting outside and you're watching the sky, and emotions are like the weather. So sometimes you have sunny days like this one in the image. Today we don't have a sunny day, it's quite cloudy and overcast. Sometimes we have windy days and rainbows, and other days, because it is Canberra, we can even have snow flurries. It's normal for the weather to change, and sometimes it changes quite suddenly, minute to minute, and other times it changes just from day to day. And sometimes when we're in a storm, for example, it can feel overwhelming, but we do know we will get through it. We can't make the storm go away, but we can observe it and notice it. And if it's cold, we can put on an extra jacket, for example. So whatever the weather is, it passes and it always changes. The sky is always there and it isn't damaged by the weather. So emotions are like the weather. They come and they go like clouds in the sky, and they float on by. And we can't change the weather, but we can change how we respond to it. That is how we behave and how we think about it. So the goal of acceptance commitment therapy, when we think about this framework, is that we don't have to control emotions. We can just notice them, experience them, and let them pass. So that was the sky metaphor. So I'm going to steal the ideas by Susan David. She has a fantastic TED Talk, if you haven't seen it yet, over 9 million views. She's a South African psychologist at Harvard Medical School. And she has recently, I don't know, in the last few years, published this book, Emotional Agility. And they're the concepts that I'm presenting today, but they're not new concepts. She's just presented them quite lovely, in a lovely way in a book, but they are based on that acceptance commitment therapy framework. So she describes emotional agility, a process that allows us to be in the moment, to change or maintain our behaviours, so we can live in ways that align with our intentions and values. So we'll go through her model and her suggestions around what emotional agility is. So then if we think about emotional agility, let's think about what isn't emotional agility, and we call that emotional rigidity. So in this framework, it's about ignoring emotions, so just pretending they're not there. It might be getting stuck or getting hooked by them. We use the word hooked a lot when we talk about emotions, or just being controlled by them. So feel angry, I'm going to throw a chair, for example. I might get us into trouble. So we'll go through those. But before we do, I wanted to talk about some rigid beliefs about emotions. Now, these might have come up when I asked you, emotions are. And these are negative beliefs, and I'm not saying that you have them, but if we go to the next slide, I've got a list of them that talk about some rigid beliefs that we might have. Now, I'm not saying you have them all the time. Sometimes, as you've already indicated, we have them on some days and not others, but it's just some ideas. So rigid beliefs could be, I should be able to control my emotions. Or it could be, other people don't feel this way. Or if I express my emotions, people will think I am weak, unstable, irrational. You might have the belief that emotions are not safe, helpful, or welcome, or I shouldn't feel this way. So do any of those resonate with you? If one does, is it permanent or does it fluctuate? And if it fluctuates, when do you have those rigid beliefs? When are those beliefs triggered? So if you feel comfortable, you can share that in the chat. So do these resonate with you? If it does, when does it? And what would trigger that kind of belief if it comes up? So anyone feel that they might want to share that in the chat? And this links back to what we said before. If I'm feeling a bit tired and I've had a big week, I might, connect with some of these. Absolutely. I shouldn't feel this way. I should get over it. I shouldn't be like this, however it comes up. So we do have at times, and some more than others and more permanently than others. Trying to hide emotions in a work context. Certain contexts can trigger them. Yep, absolutely. Yep, unwelcome emotions, very widespread. Absolutely. So it's just like, okay, these are rigid beliefs that we might hold. So what can we do to work through some of these? Always not good at that. Yeah. And you'll notice the important words in here are should. I should. So they're quite black and white, aren't they? I must. I shouldn't feel this way. It's not appropriate. The good news is the second one, other people don't feel this way. Yeah, they do. We all feel this way. Emotions are emotions. It's part of our wiring. They're supposed to keep us safe and protected and connected with other humans, or avoid the humans that make us cranky. So, they are. We all feel this way. So then moving to the next slide, and if you are okay to reflect on this and put it in the chat, how do you respond to emotions? Now, I know that's a really big question and it's time for a, Wednesday morning reflection on that. And I said it does depend on the day, how you're feeling, the patterns, the context. But how do you respond to emotions? And if come to any of my presentations, I've got a problem with this comic strip, Heart and Brain Comics. And, stereotypically the brain is supposed to be the logical one and the heart is the emotional one. And they've buried emotions under the ground and the brain saying, see, isn't that better? And the heart saying, yep. So how do you respond to emotions? Anyone feel comfortable putting that in the chat? You're welcome to. Then I'm going to go through some examples if you're thinking, oh, wait, let's see what she says first. But sometimes, absolutely, it's appropriate to get the shovel out and put them underground. 100%. We don't want to be like, crying in a meeting, at work, for example. Yeah. So, yeah, depending on the context, I might go for a walk to work through them. Fantastic. We do have some strategies and how we do them as well. So let me talk about some. Yeah, finding a person. Awesome. So this was a fun part of the presentation that I went through, and this is again in the book by Susan David, but I find these really funny. So the first, because I relate to them, I'm not, because I'm a psychologist, I still feel emotions and I still have, these behaviours, absolutely. So the first type of person is a bottler. And a bottler might push their emotions away just to get on with things. And as I said, in the short term, that's absolutely appropriate. We can't just be emotional all the time and, but we do need to push them away. If you've got an important meeting or you've got a job interview, you need to sort of push them away. And it's fine in the short term. The problem is when they're in the long term. So this person might think that emotions are uncomfortable and distracting. They might rationalize them, so get the brain out and say, well, I shouldn't feel this way and this isn't a problem and what am I thinking? Or they try to control their emotions. So can you relate to this strategy is the first question. And then are there specific times or places where you do tend to bottle things up? If you feel comfortable sharing that, you can in the chat. Today's all about normalizing that we are all experiencing these things. I bottle for sure, absolutely. And sometimes, as I said, it's absolutely appropriate to. However, there is a risk with bottling, and that's the next slide. And this one made me have a giggle as well. So we can get what we call emotional leakage. Now that sounds like a condition. We might need to see the doctor about that. But essentially, if we keep pushing away, if we bottle, push away, ignore, the suppressed emotion can inevitably resurface or surface in unintended ways. So have you ever experienced this? So you might be angry at someone and you suppress it, and then you just bite their head off because they looked at you the wrong way, or bite someone else's head off because you were feeling angry. Or you might feel really disappointed about something and you push it away and ignore it, and then you start crying at something that's pretty neutral and like having a big sob about it. And of course, this is related to stress, and I want to acknowledge that COVID has, certainly increased our stress levels at the moment. So emotional leakage can happen. So bottling is done best with short, with short time frames, and it's good intentions there. But when we continuously push our emotions away, they do go underground, but they pop back up when we least expect them and when we don't want them to. And often with surprising intensity and inappropriate intensity. So we can't hold them down for forever. They do come out. So does anyone relate to that? Anyone say, oh yeah, my husband looked at me the wrong way, completely snapped his head off. It wasn't about that. So anyone think, yeah, I've had emotional leakage. Yeah, I had a giggle about that. Yeah, something that we can definitely relate to. So that's one way we can respond. Laughing that turns into crying, yeah, that's a good one. So you become, or you're inappropriately laughing, that's another good one as well. It's a good sign that you're losing it. The next one is the brooder. Now this picture made me laugh as well. And I absolutely relate to this strategy as well. So this is when we get hooked by our emotions. So this is the person who sits and stews and stews and stews in an emotion. We can't let go of it. We can't compartmentalize it, and we just obsess. We won't let it go. And often it happens when we, something embarrassing might happen, or you feel really something unfair happen, and we just sit on it. We can lose our perspectives when we're in this place, and we can make mountains out of molehills. So unlike bottlers, they're the kind of people who push things away and never feel emotion, whereas brooders can drown in their emotions, actually. So it can be quite self-directed. So why did I do that? I'm so silly. And then you just get all caught up in that. But it does take a lot of emotional energy, and it is pretty exhausting. Ali said it looks like her. Yeah, it looks like me too. You might have a child that looks like that from time to time, or a cat or a dog, whatever is in your home. So are there any situations or time when you tend to brood? Thinking about it, it's normally when it's important to us. So when we feel a strong emotion, so unfair or anger, betrayed, embarrassed, unsupported, it comes up. Now, again, short-term brooding can be useful for problem solving. So it can help us to sort of think about, okay, how do I stop that from happening again? But it's that long-term brooding that's unhelpful. Now, another problem with brooding is that it normally happens at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Anyone wake up at 3 a.m. and start brooding? Anyone can relate to that. So yeah, it's a common response. So think about it. Are there times or situations that you tend to brood? Is there a trigger point for you where that strategy is like, oh yeah, I do brood, and it happens about work, for example, or it happens about a family issue? So brooding is a common strategy, and I certainly relate to it. Now, I had a giggle about the next picture, which Toby will show you. So this is called co-brooding. So essentially it's brooding with friends. Oh good, Ginny does it less over the years. So brooding isn't always something you do on your own in isolation. It's something you can do together. So it's when we find a friend and then we constantly complain about something. And sure, short-term purging can be helpful. Don't get me wrong, we all do it, and that's fine. But when we vent and talk about it and never move forward, and there's no resolution, that's co-brooding, and it's not very helpful. We get stagnant. And so it's like when we do it with certain people, it's like, oh yeah, when I talk to them, we brood together. And that's the co-brooding aspect. Now, this again is quite tiring, and sadly for brooders and co-brooders, and the question is, do you do this? And then if you're like, no, I don't do it, do you know someone else who does? So have you got a friend or family member who wants to just come up to you and have a big old purge every time you see them about the same thing? Yes, we do this. And then do you just say, look, man, I'm busy. I don't want to talk to this dude again about the same thing. So, you know, because they've worn us out and we kind of want to move forward. So the risk with brooding is that it is exhausting. We don't move forward with it. In the short term we can, but in that long term we can't. And the co-brooding initially could be beneficial, but long term it certainly can't be. So are there people you know who do this? Do you do this? And is it helpful? And the last one I'm going to talk about is a strategy called hooked on happiness. And this is the everything is awesome approach. And that's why I put the Lego man there. This is like, everything's fine, I'm fine, I just got to keep smiling, I'll be fine strategy. This is the person who completely ignores anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. So I don't like feeling that way, so then I have to do the everything is awesome approach. And of course, this depends on your culture. So in Western cultures, often it's around what keeps us happy, accomplishment. And, you know, it might be finishing that next paper or getting that next achievement or whatever. But the sad thing about that is it's fleeting. And then we've got other things. So then we have to pursue something else that makes us feel happy. In more collectivist cultures, it might be associated with just social harmony. So happiness is very subjective. And again, as I said, I'm not, you know, one for saying there's positive and negative emotions, but a lot of people do, you know, relate to that. So, you know, when we feel in a positive emotion state, we want to have social interactions and we know it's good for our physical health and our psychological well-being. There are benefits of negative, if you want to call it that, with our problem solving and creativity. We can only do, you know, stretch ourselves or try things differently if we actually experience negative emotions. So it promotes perseverance and resilience, and it can also promote gratitude. So again, if you're always looking for that happy feeling, that good positive feeling, however you see it, it can be really exhausting, and it's setting yourself up for failure. We can't feel that way all the time because we're not supposed to. So what is a more useful way to respond to emotions with less rigidity and more flexibility? Oh, and I just wanted to say about that last slide, this is not someone who's optimistic. So optimism is people who are hopeful that good things will happen, but they can still feel miserable, right? So you can still feel miserable and be optimistic as well. So what is emotional agility then? This definition, it says it's not about ignoring difficult emotions and thoughts. It's about facing them, holding them loosely, and courageously and compassionately, and moving on and doing stuff anyway. So this is about the values work. So even though I feel sad or disappointed, I can still do what I want to do. And that's the aspect that we'll walk through. So it also includes, we'll get to the next slide. What is emotional agility? It's loosening up. So it's not being rigid, it's calming down and living with intention. It's choosing how we respond. So noticing there is that gap between a stimulus and our response, and recognizing that we live in a dynamic, complex world that's always changing. And how do we manage that? So Susan David suggested 4 elements of, or components of, emotional agility, and I'll go through the 4 of them today, but they are to showing up, stepping out, walking your why, and moving on. So we'll go through the first step. So the first step is showing up. And as I said, it's not about being a bottler or a brooder. It's just facing your emotions, acknowledging that they're there with openness and curiosity and kindness. Experiencing them, recognizing that we all do feel them. We're not alone. And that's the part that relates to self-compassion. So one way to do it is to change the way you talk about it. So you might say, instead of saying, I am feeling angry, it could be, I am noticing that I'm feeling angry. So you're taking one step back from your experience. You don't have to change it. It's just noticing it. It's just like the cloud floating on by. It's just an emotion, and there it is. If, this is like, oh, my vocabulary for emotions is quite limited, it might just be increasing your vocabulary so you can express how you're feeling in a more comprehensive way. So give yourself permission to stop pushing emotions away, but just, face them, acknowledge that they're there. And it's, that old thing when you try to ignore something, so do not think about the chocolate cake in the fridge. We tend to fixate on it more. So it's just like, okay, I'm noticing that I'm feeling sad, and I'm noticing it's in my chest and in my throat. So it's just paying attention to and facing your emotions. Then the second step that is proposed in this model is called stepping out. And similar to that, it's about taking a step back and observing them and not getting hooked by them. And again, trying to reduce that inner critic that we have about I shouldn't feel this way and this isn't appropriate, and just saying, okay, I am having the thought that, I shouldn't feel this way, and I'm noticing that I'm feeling angry. And noticing that there's a space between stimulus and response, and to gain perspective. So in this process, it's really about, noticing your inner thoughts, your inner language. I am bad at presentations. Well, is that a useful thought to have around, your position on that come up? Notice we have contradictions, and, we can have two things at the same time. So we can have paradoxes. So I both love and hate doing this. And that's okay, it's complex. Having a laugh, so just having a bit of a giggle if you've had a emotional leakage with a friend, having a bit of a laugh about that and acknowledging that and saying, wow, I really probably should, have a time out or do something kind to myself if I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm calling it out. So again, I'm having the thought that, or I'm noticing that. And some people say to gain perspective, writing things down can be useful. And as I said, when we're brooding, we don't have a lot of perspective. We get fixated. So it's taking that step out and gaining perspective on what our emotions are. It also helps us to, investigate what happened, what caused that emotion, where did that come from, what was the trigger? So moving through that. So moving to the next step, we have walking your why. So this is the part that you can feel whatever you feel, because that's okay. It's emotions and they're there. But what are you going to do with that? And what do you link it back to? So identifying your values is important in this space. So why would you move ahead and do this even though you feel sad or angry or disappointed? And who doesn't feel those ways, at work or at home? It's about linking back to why am I doing this? So if you don't know your values, there's the VIA matters to you. What is it that matters to you? What's important to you? And a lot of us talk about, well, my family, for example, or my relationships, or my work, or my health, or my mental health. So there's many things there. But essentially, emotions are about, your true north, your compass, and that's why the compass is there. It's your guiding direction. Where are you heading? And it's different from goals. Goals are tick the box kind of things. So running a marathon is a goal, but the value is having good health, to be physically well. So if you don't know your values, you can do that survey, or just think about what's important to me. In that survey, there's 24 character strengths if you're interested. So that's the first part of walking your why. Then the second part is this concept by Russ Harris, who's a ACT therapist, and he talks about a choice point. And a choice point is about, when I have a moment and I have to make a choice, am I moving away from the person I want to be, or am I moving towards the person I want to be? So am I getting hooked and moving away, or just getting unhooked and moving towards? And in this, it really talks about, it's easy to do stuff that we value when we're having a good time, when life's good and when we're feeling good. Yep, I'm definitely not going to eat 2 donuts today because I feel good. But when I'm feeling sad, I'm going to eat those 2 donuts, potentially. It's like, okay, having a moment and say, do I need to eat those 2 donuts? Does that relate back to the value of being well, or being physically fit? So life isn't easy. We have a lot of complex choices to make all the time. But at that choice point, we have a decision. Do I want to get hooked and walk away from the value that I have, or do I want to unhook myself and walk towards it? So that's part of the walking your why aspect to this model. And the next one, and the final one, is moving on. So once I've faced my emotions and moved away from them a little bit, and still like, okay, I'm making a choice that relates back to my values, it's moving on is about making those small changes to do that. And she has some nice principles in her book around the tiny tweaks principle. And that's making small changes that move towards your values. So if you have been hooked and you're moving away from your values, what can you do to move back towards them? And that might be tweaking your beliefs that you have, your mindset, your motivations, and your habits. So that might be getting up 15 minutes earlier so you can have a cup of tea with your partner and spend that time connecting with them. Or, as I said, buying 1 packet of biscuits instead of 2 the next time you do some groceries. So for you, thinking about and reflecting, are there things that you could tweak at the moment that would help to walk your why? Anything that you kind of let go? We know COVID's been busy, life's been busy, work is busy, everything, homeschooling, all those things we do. But is there something you can think, I could probably tweak that a little bit? I've kind of let that go and it doesn't relate, my values aren't really being heard or seen at the moment. So that's one part of the moving on aspect. And then the second one is called the seesaw principle. And this is finding the balance between challenge and competence. Now, we love to stay in our comfort zone. I don't know who's in their comfort zone. I don't even know where that is. I've forgotten where that is, but, we like to stay in our comfort zone. But this is about, expanding that. Life is full of challenges. We're always going to have to, learn new skills and learn new things and, be in uncomfortable emotions. So it's about pushing your comfort zone, learning to live in discomfort, and, not getting too comfortable. So finding balance between challenge and competence and growing. And in the ACT framework, we talk about what we call dead man's goals. And a lot of people say, I don't want to feel sad. It's like, well, that's a dead man's goal. They don't feel sad. So if you're just like, I don't want to feel, it's like, okay, I acknowledge that, life is challenging and there's lots of aspects to it, and I'm open to growing and developing in that. So they're the 4 principles. I've just got the next slide. It's, reminding us that, are you a bottler? Is that your favourite method to contain your emotions? Are you a brooder or a co-brooder? Or are you a everything is awesome kind of person, ignoring everything and just like, I need to be happy all the time? And, have you had episodes of emotional leakage recently? It might be a sign that like, actually, I might need to sort of manage my emotions a bit differently. We do want to avoid emotional leakage because it is awkward and uncomfortable to do that. So then summarising, we've got this concept of what emotional agility is, and it includes, in the next slide, are we getting hooked or are we going through the steps? Are we facing emotions? Are we stepping away from them a little bit to gain perspective and look at them in a more holistic way? Are we walking our why? Are we moving towards our values and instead of away from them? And are we moving forward? Are we dealing with all those challenges that life throws at us, even though it's hard and challenging, with the goal of thriving? So another really important part of emotional agility is asking for help. So talk to a trusted friend, you know, someone that you find, you know, would be a good listener and to hear how you're going. See your GP or a mental health care professional. You can always call Lifeline and Beyond Blue if you think that, you know, could just talk to someone about this. There are supports for ANU staff and students as well. There's the Wellbeing Support Line, and that's a 24-hour service. You can phone or SMS, so there's voice calls or SMS messaging to get support. Students can book free sessions at ANU Counselling as well, and staff can get up to 4 free appointments with Assure programs, which are psychologists. And of course, we have the ANU advisor if you'd like to speak to them about professional counselling. So there's some really fantastic resources out there at the moment. As I said, if you wanted to watch the Susan David TED Talk, you'll see where this came from. She's got a very interesting background, you know, and why she's so passionate about this work. There's the College of Health and Medicine Wellbeing page, and a group of researchers across the ANU, so a collaboration between Research School of Psychology and Research School of Population Health, have created these Mind Seeds videos and podcasts. They're really fun to watch and illustrated by Ali Wetherell, who's on, I think she's on, I can't see her at the moment. Fantastic artist. So there's some amazing resources out there if you feel that you could do with some more support, or just to get, you know, connect back with your values and your well-being. So I have finished. That's the end of the presentation. So now's a really good time we've just got a little bit of time, you know, of course you can ask questions, or it might just be reflecting or normalizing your experience, something you related to in that presentation, or something that you're thinking about tweaking. So Toby, if you don't mind, I'm sharing your screen and I'll stop the recording if I can.